Brazil was one of the last countries in the world to abolish slavery in 1888.
There's no racism here, everybody is mixed, everybody lives together. But on the other hand, the Black population is still apart, from fundamental rights.
Every 23 minutes, a Black boy is killed by a police in Brazil. The police has always been violent.
Brazil is the kind of place that sells itself as a tropical paradise, a land of sun, dance, and cultural fusion. But peel back the glitter, and you'll uncover something much darker. Because for millions of Afro-Brazilians, this isn't quite the paradise it claims to be. While America had Jim Crow and South Africa had apartheid, Brazil had something more sinister: a lie. A myth sold to the world, and to itself, that Brazil is a racial democracy, that it's colorblind, that everyone, no matter their skin tone, lives together in harmony. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because being Black in Brazil means being followed in stores, being denied a job because you're not the right kind of Black. It means living in favelas, earning half the salary of your white peers, and being far more likely to perish at the hands of the police. In this video, we're going to walk you through the disturbing reality of what it truly means to be Black in Brazil, a reality the government, media, and even some of your favorite influencers don't want you to see. Before we continue with the video, if you like our content and want to help show support, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. Every extra voice helps bring about justice to those whose stories are left untold. Let's get one thing straight. Brazil wasn't just a participant in the transatlantic slave trade. It was the epicenter. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, Brazil imported over 4 million African slaves. That's more than any other country in the world. More than the United States, the Caribbean, and anywhere else in the Americas. For over 300 years, Brazil built its entire economy on the backs of enslaved Africans. They worked the sugar plantations, mined the gold, and built the cities that would become the foundation for modern Brazil. And while other nations gradually began to abolish the practice, Brazil held on. In fact, Brazil has another dark distinction. It was one of the last countries in the Western world to abolish slavery. The year was 1888. By this point, most of the world had already moved on, but Brazil had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the modern era. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because while Brazil's elite was busy working people to death, something remarkable was happening in the forests and mountains across the country. They were called quilombos, communities formed by people who were once enslaved. They were those who said, "Enough is enough." The most famous of these was Quilombo dos Palmares, led by the legendary Zumbi. This wasn't just some small hideout either. We're talking about a settlement of over 20,000 people that existed for almost 100 years. A literal kingdom of freedom fighters who built their own society while the rest of Brazil was still trapped in the dark ages of human trade. The quilombos stood as living proof of Black resistance and power. In these communities, former enslaved people built their own governance, maintained their African traditions, and showed Brazil what freedom really looked like. Fast forward to 2025, the fight continues. Over 1.3 million Quilombolas, descendants of these freedom fighters, still call Brazil home. But the government are still playing games with people's lives. The numbers tell the story. Out of 1,800 Quilombola territories seeking official recognition, a mere 211 have received their land titles. The rest are trapped in a bureaucratic maze, some for more than a decade. It's a bitter irony. The same people whose ancestors broke free from chains now have to beg for papers to prove they own their land. In 2025, their battle for basic rights continues. This brutal history laid the groundwork for modern Brazil, a country built through massive exploitation, challenged by fierce resistance, where free Black communities rose up in defiance of slavery itself. But the story doesn't end with broken chains. What followed slavery was something far more subtle, and in many ways, more dangerous. Because you can see chains, you can break them. But systemic racism is a whole different kind of monster. When human trade ended in 1888, Brazil faced a question that would shape its future. What do you do with a newly freed black majority population? Well, the answer is absolutely nothing. No land distribution or education programs, no integration policies, no compensation for centuries of forced labor. The message was clear. You're free. Now figure it out yourself. But this wasn't just negligence or incompetence from government officials. No, this was strategy. You see, Brazil's elite had a problem. Their country was seen as backwards by the civilized European nations. So their solution was a government project so sinister it would make any eugenicist proud. It's called the Whitening Project. The Brazilian government actually invested money, real, taxpayer money, to import European immigrants. The goal was to quite literally dilute the black population out of existence. They provided land, housing, and financial incentives to white Europeans, the very things they denied their newly freed black population. Between 1890 and 1914, Brazil welcomed nearly 3 million European immigrants with open arms and open wallets. But here's where it gets truly diabolical. While actively working to eliminate their black population through whitening, Brazil's government pulled off one of the greatest propaganda coups in history. They invented a myth so powerful, so seductive, that it fooled the world for decades. They called it racial democracy. The story went like this. Unlike those discriminatory Americans with their Jim Crow laws, or those terrible South Africans with their apartheid, Brazil is a post-racial paradise. Here, all races live in harmony. Here, there is no racism. It was a masterpiece of deception, a lie so big, so bold, that people actually bought it. International scholars praised Brazil's unique racial harmony. Tourists marveled at the mixing of races. The world looked at Brazil as a model of racial integration, but the reality was far from it. Black Brazilians were systematically being pushed into favelas, Brazil's infamous slums. Their children were being shut out of quality schools. They were being denied jobs, housing, and basic dignity, all while being told that discrimination didn't exist in their country. This was basically psychological warfare on a national scale. Because how do you fight an enemy that officially doesn't exist? How do you organize against discrimination in a country that convinced itself and the world that discrimination isn't real at all? The genius of Brazil's approach was its subtlety. No need for separate water fountains when you can achieve segregation through neutral economic policies. No need for explicit racial laws when you accomplish the same goals through silent discrimination. And the most perverse part in all of this is that the myth of racial democracy became so deeply embedded in Brazilian society that even today, many Brazilians still cling to it. They point to mixed marriages, to carnival, to soccer teams, all while ignoring the glaring inequalities that persist in every aspect of Brazilian life. But by the 1930s, this carefully constructed facade was about to face its first real challenge. Because you can only gaslight people for so long before they start to see through the smoke and mirrors. It all started with the Frente Negra Brasileira, which is the first Afro-Brazilian organization demanding full participating rights in Brazilian society. Headquartered in Sao Paulo, it quickly spread around the country. They showed what was possible when Black Brazilians united against the system. Building on that foundation, the unified Black movement burst onto the scene, and they had one clear message: cut the BS. These activists looked around and saw the truth plain as day. They saw how Black Brazilians were living in favelas, while white Brazilians occupied the wealthy neighborhoods. They saw their kids getting turned away from good schools. They watched as their communities were terrorized by police violence. And for the first time in Brazilian history, they started talking about it, loudly. Black consciousness groups began sprouting up across the country. And most importantly, they started building real political power. The movement grew teeth. Their message? We're not celebrating 100 years of false freedom. We're not playing along with your feel-good narrative anymore. This wasn't just about politics. A whole cultural renaissance exploded across Brazil. Black Brazilians started embracing their African heritage openly and proudly. Natural hair became a symbol of resistance. African religious practices, which had been forced underground for centuries, began to be celebrated openly. Black artists and intellectuals stepped into the spotlight. They wrote books exposing Brazil's discriminatory reality. They created art that celebrated Black beauty and power. They made music that told stories of resistance and pride. The government's perfect little fairy tale was starting to crack. Because once people start speaking their truth, once they start connecting the dots and seeing the system for what it really is, well, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. But here's the thing about awakening. It doesn't happen overnight. And while Black Brazilians were rising up and demanding to be heard, the system they were fighting against wasn't going down without a fight either. Fast forward to 2025, and that same system has evolved into something far more sophisticated. The discrimination of modern Brazil hides behind statistics and systems, woven so deeply into the fabric of society that many pretend it's not even there. But make no mistake, that fabric is tearing apart at the seams. Let's talk money. In 2025, white Brazilians are still making double what Black Brazilians earn for the same work. Double. And we're not talking about small numbers here. White workers pull in about 73% more than their Black counterparts every single month. The unemployment numbers are even more brutal. Black Brazilians make up 64% of the unemployed population. Think about that. In a country where more than half the population is Black, they're the ones left standing when the music stops in the job market. In education? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Take the University of São Paulo, Brazil's most prestigious university. The numbers tell a story so stark it's almost hard to believe. 79.5% of students are white. Want to guess how many are Black? 1%. And that's not a typo. And this isn't happening by accident. Black neighborhoods get the worst funded schools. The textbooks are outdated, the teachers are undertrained, and the facilities are falling apart. It's a perfect trap. Bad schools lead to fewer opportunities for higher education. Fewer degrees lead to lower paying jobs. Lower income means staying in underserved neighborhoods. And the cycle continues. Look at any major Brazilian city, and you'll see the same pattern. The wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods spread across the flatlands and beachfronts. Meanwhile, the Black population are systematically pushed into the most dangerous and least desirable areas. And this is why the geography of Brazilian cities reads like a map of racial segregation. Except, you won't find any laws mandating where Black people can and can't live. You don't need them when economic warfare does the job just as effectively. But there's something even more deeply disturbing about the whole system. Because sometimes, the discrimination against Black Brazilians comes in the shape of a loaded gun. And the numbers don't lie. In 2020, Black Brazilians were 2.7 times more likely to perish from police violence than their white counterparts. But that's just statistic. Let's talk about what that actually means. It means 76% of people killed by police are Black. It means that in a single year, 2016, over 4,200 people were executed by police. 4,200 lives. 3 out of every 4 of them were Black. 8 out of 10 were between 12 and 29 years old. Yes, just 12 years old. Let's put a name to one of these statistics. Agatha Felix, 8 years old, shot in the back by police in Rio de Janeiro. Her crime? Sitting in a van with her mother, heading home. 1 bullet, 1 child, 1 more name added to a list that keeps growing longer every year. The police's response to this was passing an anti-crime bill that actually gives police officers broader justification for using deadly force. Because apparently, terminating Black Brazilians with impunity wasn't enough already. And if you survive your encounter with the police, well, that's when you meet Brazil's justice system. In São Paulo, for every 100,000 white inhabitants, 76.8 end up in prison. For Black inhabitants, that number skyrockets to 421. You're literally 5 times more likely to end up behind bars if you're Black. And for worse crimes, you're looking at an average sentence of 35.7 years. If you're white, only 20.1 years. Same crime, different skin color, nearly double the time. And good luck proving racial discrimination in court. But still, Black Brazilians are going into the fray. Take the 2020 municipal elections. For the first time in Brazilian history, more Black candidates than white ones registered to run for local office. Sounds like progress, right? Well, hold your applause. Because this is Brazil, and things are never that simple. See, a lot of these Black candidates only started identifying as Black right before the election. Funny how that happens right when courts mandate that parties have to give Black candidates fair funding. Some of these politicians spent their entire careers checking white on their census forms, but suddenly had a change of heart when it became politically convenient. The genuinely Black candidates face a brutal reality in Brazilian politics. Despite Black Brazilians making up the majority of the population, they hold just 18% of congressional seats. The corporate world tells the same story. A mere 4.7% of executives in major companies are Black. This isn't just underrepresentation. This is systematic exclusion. The media is not much better. Turn on Brazilian TV and you might think you're in Norway. Black Brazilians are either invisible or trapped in stereotypical roles. When they do appear in the news, it's usually in stories about crime, poverty, or violence. But something's shifting. The new generation isn't buying the old lies anymore. Social media has given Black Brazilians a platform to tell their own stories, to organize, to expose racism in real time. Every police shooting, every act of discrimination, every instance of racism gets recorded, shared, discussed. Affirmative action policies are finally opening doors in universities. Black voices are getting louder in politics, in the media, in business. There's a growing awareness that Brazil's racial democracy was always a myth, and more people are willing to say it out loud. Young Black activists are connecting their struggle to global movements. They're studying their history, reclaiming their identity, demanding their rights. They're not asking politely anymore. They're taking what's rightfully theirs. The struggle continues. Because after 500 years of broken promises, of violence, of systematic exclusion, one thing is clear. Brazil's Black population isn't asking for equality anymore. They're fighting for it, and they're not backing down. And Brazil isn't the only country trying to hide its Black history. Just north of here, another nation has been working even harder to erase its African roots entirely. If you want to learn more about it, click here to watch our video, Why Mexico is Erasing All Black People.